Okay, so we're going to talk about classes and properties of matter. So let's just start out at the top. And we'll say matter can be broken up into different classes. So there's two major classes of matter. There's what is called pure substances, and there are what are called mixtures. So all matter fits into one of these two categories, either a pure substance or a mixture. So the pure substances can be divided even farther into two categories. One would be an element, and the other would be something called a compound. So I'm just going to finish filling out the table and then we'll come back to these and talk about them each a little bit more. So the mixtures can also be broken apart into two categories. Either what's called a homogeneous mixture, or what's called a heterogeneous mixture. So all matter falls into one of these four categories. So let's just go back and define elements first. So an element is anything that's found on the periodic table. So the periodic table of elements, you can find it in your textbook, on the back cover of your textbook, on our SmartWorks page. You can Google it. We'll use periodic tables throughout this whole quarter to look at different properties of elements. So an element is defined as a substance that cannot be separated into a simpler substance by a chemical process. So some examples of elements that we will commonly use, just from the periodic table, we'll talk a lot about carbon. So carbon is capital C on the periodic table. And we're going to talk about what makes these elements, what gives them their identity and their properties. We're going to talk about all of that in chapter 2. There's oxygen, there's sulfur, there's nitrogen. There's many elements. And we're going to talk about a lot of them and what makes each of them different later on. But that's what an element is. And an element is a pure substance. Another type of pure substance is called a compound. And a compound that is composed of two or more elements chemically bonded together. They can be separated by chemical processes. So I'm just going to write that. Composed of two or more elements. That are chemically bonded together. And they can be separated by chemical processes. Can be separated. So some examples of a compound, let me just put some more examples of elements over here so we can use them in our compound. So another example of an element would be Na, which is sodium, Cl, which is chlorine. So an example of a compound would be NaCl. This is called sodium chloride. And this is an example of a compound. It's made up of 2 elements. So there are a lot of examples of compounds. They are made up of 2 or more elements that are chemically bonded together. And we are going to spend a whole lot of time on this later, talking about how compounds are made, what types of bonds hold them together, how they're named. All of that is coming. But a compound is a type of a pure substance. It's made of 2 or more elements that are chemically bonded together, and it can be separated. So let's talk about different type of mixtures. So mixtures are not pure substances. There's 2 types of mixtures. A homogeneous mixture is, the best way to define it is that it's uniform. Uniform, homogeneous, that's just another word for same, meaning that this mixture cannot be easily separated. So let's talk about a heterogeneous mixture, and then we'll talk about the 2. And heterogeneous mixture can be easily separated. So a good example when we're talking about mixtures is, let's just say we have like chicken noodle soup. So here is my chicken noodle soup. And we have some noodles in here. And we have some carrots, and we have some peas, and we have some chicken. This whole thing together would be a heterogeneous mixture. Because it's made up of things that you could easily separate. You could easily separate all the chicken, all the carrots, all the peas, all the noodles, and then what you would have left is the broth. So the broth of the chicken noodle soup, the chicken stock, this would be a homogeneous mixture. Because that broth is not a pure substance. It's made up of all kinds of stuff in there. It's got water and salt and all kinds of different things in that stock. And you cannot easily separate the water and the salt and all the other spices and things that are in there in that homogeneous mixture. So these are the different classes of matter and some of the properties of the different classes of matter. Let's talk a minute. Let's maybe leave this here. So this is the different classes of matter and their properties. You will see some problems where you'll be asked to, you'll be given a substance and you'll be asked to determine which type of matter it is.